nui i awa wā. Tōna rereke ki nāia tonu nei e hikama. I rongo ai rātou, kōna hoa i te ngau o te kaikiri, o te pēhitanga, o te whiu kōrero me te hāpārangi. I a rātou e kohi waitohu ana. Au atu, kohi ai he toru tekau mano waitohu, he kaupapa nui tēnei. Nā kōna i tū ai te Reo Māori, nō muri mai ko te wiki Reo Māori. E hoa, tātou, homa te pakipaki mo John. Kua pau te 50 tau, ko tātou tēnei e huitahi nei tihei wa Māori ora. Tētahi wana tino kōrero, John, ka noho taina koe kia ngai tāua i roto i ngā mahi whakaora reo, rauora reo, e te pāpā, e hone, nau mai, piki mai.
Kia ora rā.
Hoi anō, taku taha mātou, Joe Te Rito. I tipu ake a Joe i te māhia, i wanganui i tōna iwi o rongo mai wahine, ka pakeke mai i o māhu, i wanganui tōna iwi, nui tonu o ngā tika hunganu. No tōna haerenga ki te whare wānanga o Waikato, Wikitoria, aroha mai, Wikitoria i aua wā, te herenga waka i nāia tonu nei, e hoa. Ka uru ia ki roto i te rōpū o Te Reo Māori, ara Te Reo Māori Society. Ko ia tētahi o ngā tangata i reira i te rā, i kawe ai te pētihana Reo Māori ki te whare paremata i te tau 1972. Kua pau te 50 tau i nei Joe, ko koe tērā e whakaako ana, e pakanga ana mo te reo. Ko koe tētahi ngā tiamana o te reo irirangi, o Ngāti Kahungunu, mai rano, mai tōna timatanga mai, tau no mai ki 1988? Ki nāia tonu nei, heka. Ko koe te tūmoaki hoki o te kura Māori o EIT, i tau nā wā, mo te takaumawhitu tau ki taku mōhio, ka takaumārua tau ki ngā pai o te māramatanga e mahi ana. Hea hoki he rāpapotatanga o era mahi katoa, ko koe tetehi o ngā hoia ki ana rānei mo te Reo Māori, e pakanga ana ki te mura o te ahi. Tēnei ahau o tira mātou, te iwi whakarongo mai nei, e mihi nei kia kōrua. Whānau, welcome to this kōrero about the history of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. It's always struck me as a person who has heard about the week, starting off with the day, as to what was the history of this? Who was there in those days? What inspired you to do this big thing? And what has happened since then that you were a part of? So I'm going to kick this off, if it's okay, with the first question. Te pētihana Reo Māori, kai a koe, kai a kōrua. Hea ngā whainga nui o te pētihana, koe ngā rōpū i kaha tautoko i te pētihana, hea ta whakautu o Aotearoa nui tonu i Auara. Kai a koe, taku pāpā, Joe, hea ho whakaro.
Tuatahi tēnā rā koe atu whai, tēnā hoki koe John, tēnā rā koutou e mātakitaki maina, e whakarongo maina. Kia hoki atu aku mahara ki tērā wā, ko te whakatauki nui o te wā, Māori tū, Māori ora, Māori noho, Māori mate. Koera i whakatauki te ai, i wainganui ngā ākonga, te hapori Māori i tērā wā, ki te kore tātou e tū, ko mate no tō tātou reo. Nā reira, koera te tino whakatauki o te wā.
Nā reira kai o tātou ringaringa, te oranga o te Reo Māori.
Ki te ngoi kore tātou, ka tino mate tō tātou reo. I puta hoki i ngā rangahau Richard Benton, i te tau whitu te kaumā whāpea o te rā rautau, ko heke te paiheneti ki te kaumā waru, noiho, o te hunga Māori e kaha ana ki te kōrero Māori. Ko pērā rawa, o aua tāngatara, ko te nuinga he kaumā atua, he noho ki tuawhenua. Nā reira, i reira, ka puta ia e te kōrero, the Māori language was in a perilous state. Nā reira, ko tērā, engari ko te petihana, i tipu ake tērā, kia hoki aku mihi kia koro Jews. Koia te tino tangata i whakaoreore i a mātou ngā ākonga i konei Wikitoria. Puta ia e te kōrero, kārehe reo atu i tō Ngāti Porou. Tēnā wero mai a mātou me hoki koutou ki o koutou takiwā ki te whakapūmau ake i o koutou nā reo a iwi. Nā reira, ka nui taku mihi atu ki aia, nāna mātou i whakaore-ore. Nā reira, ka tū me ke koia te kaikōkiri. I tū atu i ngā kaumātua i reira i tērā wā, koia tonu te mea, kaha ki te aki a mātou, te whakahui a mātou, ka tū ngā hui ki te whare tēnihi, ne? I konei, i ngā...
The pavilion.
Tennis pavilion, ka hui mātou te prakitihi tēnei mahi, te whaikōrero, te waiata, engari, ka taimai, ka hui mātou, ka rangahau, ka me rautaki mātou, me aha mātou, e hoki mai anō, e pūmau anō tō tātou reo. Nā reira. Engari, i puta i a Hannah Jackson, nōna te whakaaro, me mea he piti hana reo Māori. Nā ko Hannah, no te whānau te hemara, o roto o Taranaki, i mua i a Sid Jackson. Nā ro reira, ko rāwe i roto i te rōpū ngā tamatoa, ko rātou mā ko tame iti mā, ko taura eru era mā, ko rātou katoa era i roto i tērā rōpū. Te nuinga o rātou e mahi mai ana i tāmaki makaurau, ko mātou o te rōpū o te Reo Māori Society, i konei e mahi haere ana. Nā reira, ka puta ake tērā kōrero te whakaaro i a Hannah, nā ka mau i a mātou, nā ka tīmata mātou. I te hui nui, ka tūki konei Federation of Māori Students, te whiti te kaumā rua, ai reira, ka taimai a ngā tamatoa me ngā akonga, nā ka whakamoengia te rōpū e kia nei Federation of Māori University Students, ko au te prehitini i tērā wā, he mea pōtia hau, aha ko kāre au i te hui. Ka hoki mai au i ngā hara oko mengi, ko au hei prehitini.
Kāre koe te hui.
Kāre kēnu au i te hui. Ka pōtingia.
Hei tumuaki.
Hei tumuaki, hei prehitini mo te hui. Ka tū te hui, whakamutunga o te graduate students, Māori students i Waifetu. I reira, ka turakina, ka whakamoengia tērā rōpū, ka whakatūngia he mea hou ko te huinga rangatahi. I te mea kia uru mai ngā rangatahi katoa kauoko ngā akonga kei ngā whare wānanga. Nake, nā reire, puta i rā tūmomo kōrero i ngā tamatoa me ngā mea kāre i te haere te whare wānanga. Nā reire, me ki e toripea ngā rōpū i whakahaere, i whawhai mo te reo, ko ngā tamatoa, ko te Reo Māori Society me te huinga rangatahi. Koera me ki ngā rōpū matua, engari i puta ki ngā takiwā katoa ngā ārātau a mātou nā mahi.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Ko tira mo tira.
Kia whakaaro, John. You know, what are your memories in terms of the petition, those involved? What are your earliest memories?
Well, tai atu au ki te whare wānanga o Wikitori i te tau ko tahi mana i wadau whiti tukau mā waru. I tērā wā ka reira koro Juzma e whakaako i te reo Māori. Nānei karangatu ki a hau nei, hara mai rā koutou ngā uri a Kapini Cook. Engari, ka whakahoki a hau, hara au te tahi uri a Kapini Cook. Te whenua a ngā airihi.
Airihi mana.
Ka mau. Tino manaki a koro mā me te whānau, me te kāinga, kia hau mai i tērā wā i taku nohanga ki te whare wānanga. Ki taku nei whakaaro, tautoko ana hau ki tēnā kōrero a Joe kia whakarangatira a tātou tauira Māori he tuakana ko mātou ngā tangata āwhina, tangata tautoko, ko mātou te teina. So Māori only could hold positions in Te Reo Māori and control it, and the Pākehā were to be teinas. And that was really important because within a very short time there were many more Pākehā students coming to Te Reo Māori than Māori, and if we hadn't had that, the organisation would have just been overwhelmed, and who knows who might have been voted in. So that established a pattern for how we were to work and to support the reo and to acknowledge Māori and Te Reo as tuakana. And that's been the way that I've worked all my life.
Could I just say, John, that's really enlightening, because I know that in the tangata tiriti space that we talk about in modern times, tangata tiriti, tangata whenua, there's a really big focus on how do we be better treaty partners, you know? And one of those principles, I suspect, is the principle that you've just spoken about, that, you know, sometimes we need to step back as tauiwi, or step alongside, but definitely not step to the front. So can I just acknowledge you for that, and all your hard mahi, because I know there's lots of times when our rangatira need people to write the notes, to do the minutes, to drive us to the hui, and without those people in the background doing the hard yards, things don't get done. Yeah. So, me mihi au kia koe. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the people that you worked with and served to make these things happen?
Well, perhaps I could just elaborate on that, because I never saw that time as being something for Pākehā to do, strangely. I saw it as a vision for a different sort of society that we needed, given what had happened to my ancestors in Ireland and the terrible colonisation and genocide and things and loss of language and culture. So I came with a mind of wanting to be part of a different sort of society than my grandparents.
So you're talking about your Irish whakapapa?
Yeah, my Irish whakapapa, yeah. So I was quite happy in that role, because, you know, so I didn't really start off sort of wanting to be an expert in Te Reo. I started off wanting to share with other Pākehā this vision about what sort of people we could be, what sort of country we could be, what sort of nation we should be. And so it was a long time before I actually took learning Te Reo seriously, because I was just...
But you clearly had a passion
to
make things happen because of the history you knew.
Yeah, because of what I knew.
Went through.
And the way in which Koro and Joe and you know, Akuhoa said, let's do this together. Yeah.
Ka pai.
Me mihi ka tika ki te hunga pēnei John, me kore ake rātou, kore pēnei rawa te pai, te hua mai o e rā mahi. I te mea, ko rātou mā ngā tono me ki. Ka tukuna John, nāna te mahi te mauhare ngā tapu, te hopu e ngā kōrero, e rā mea katoa. Nā reira, kia kaha tātou ki te hāpai i a ngai tangata triti, mena hihi ana rātou te whakapiri mai kia tātou, kia kaha tātou ki te āki a rātou i te mea, kāre tai tātou anaki. Me kukume mai a tauiwi, nā reira mai rāno a John Mā e tautoko ana i te kaupapa nei. Nā reira me pērā tuni tātou, kaua tātou e whakamataku i a tauiwi, mena hihi ana rātou te hāpai i a tātou, kumea mai.
Anuri Rob.
Anuri Rob, Roger Steele.
Bernie Kurina,
Yes.
Bernie, by the time I was at Vicky was there, but you know, aranua te hunga tauiwi ko harama ki te āwhina i a tātou, me kaha tātou ki te manaki a rātou. Tino pai tū kōrero. Keen to go back in those times and understand what was the environment like. Because I think, you know, one of the things I say to my kids, it was different in those days, but they don't know.
When we were collecting signatures for the petition, people were spat at, people were punched, dogs were set on the collectors, on our students in Porirua. There was a general feeling of, this is a waste of time, bugger off, what are you doing here? So there was a very antagonistic general mood among Pākehā, I think, at that time, as though Te Reo was a gone language. It was largely a waste of time. And I think it was a shock for us students to move out of that supportive environment with KD and into whānui down into the streets and run into that stuff. But it was good, because we had that shock, and then we knew what we were facing. My goodness, we knew what we were facing.
I haere takirua mātou, kia whai hoa e te tahi, kia kaue haere ngā tahi te tangata ki te pāpau, ki te kuaha, nā reira me haere takirua. E rere ki anō, te wai haere mātou ki Karori, ki Kandala, he rere ki anō, i rā nā whakautu me ki, nā kuahai pāmai ki o mātou kanohi. A wau waimari au kāre au i Patua, i Mekea, kāre taku kumu i Ngaua. Tērā pe he kaha nōku ki te inoi, ki te ariki, te teaki au. Engari, te haeretanga ki roto o Porirua ki Cannons Creek, he rere ki anō. Kāre mātou mataku i te pātoto i te mea ko ngā tangata i reira he kiriprauri, no ngā mautere he Māori, nā reira, kāre i pērā rawa te kino mai ki a mātou. Ko taku mataku i reira, ko ngā mataku au te kuri, kai ngau au te kuri, Koe rā nā kare matako I te tangata I porirua, engari kona I nei wāhi noho nei, runga nei, he ahurereke te me te nuinga he kiri.
So really, in our view, because we had access to Dr. Richard Benton's and Council for Educational Research on Who's Speaking Māori, and our students, our colleagues, our friends were working for Richard as researchers and collectors and visiting homes. So we got down to 11% at one stage, and then down to 5% of Māori students, children entering school speaking Te Reo. So we knew that the situation was really desperate, and something had to be done about that.
Joe, I'm keen to inquire about the influences of all these things that are in our houses that meant it was hard for the reo to survive. I mean, I at our house, people speak Māori, they go to classes, and it's, you can have English going on in the background, kāre he raru. But you were saying to me before, I ngā wā o mua, karakai he reo Māori ki tō kāinga, ko te reo Pākehā nake kai te hamahama.
Ia au e tipu ana I roto te māhia kua ku tīpuna nā rāua I whāngai. Koe rā te reo tuatahi reire. Ko mātou waimari au I rongo aku taringa I whāngangi aku taringa ki te reo I te wā I pakupaku ana. Ka hua rima aku tau ka hunuku mātou ki o māhu. Ko te reo Pākehā e kahana te rere o te reo Pākehā. Ko te rerekētanga o reira, ko te wairehe reo Pākehā. I puta mai ana ngā kōrero Pākehā ia rā mai te teihana 2ZC. Me ngā waiata hou, pop songs, e rā mea he whakawai I a tātou kia huri o tātou taringa ki te...
He whakawai.
Whakawai I a tātou kia tahuri atu ki te rā reo. Nā wai rā, ka pērā rawa, ka kaha mai te whāngai, tanga mai o te reo ki roto I a mātou, ko kaha ke mātou te kōrero I te reo Pākehā. Engari, te huringa o ngā tau, tāku, ka riro mā tērā taputapu mā te reo irirangi, nāna me ki I patu te reo I roto I tō mātou kāinga. Nāna I tāmi te reo o kutīpuna, engari I roto I ngā tau te whakatūtanga o ngā reo irirangi Māori, me ki nā taua taputapu anō I whakahoki mai te reo ki roto I o tātou kāinga. I te mea. Ko te painga o tērā, ko kore he kaumātua hei whāngai mai te reo, nā reira kariro mā te teihana e whāngai mai te reo. Ko te painga o te reo irirangi, ko te wāriu mo te tāra, anei te pōka whakaata, rawe te pōka whakaata, engari tērā tahi mano tāra ka pau I te hawhi haora, he whakaaturanga hawhi haora, engari te reo irirangi, te wāriu o te kotahi rau mano tāra, nui noa atu, maha ngā mea ka kape I roto tērā. Me nā reira, koe mea ana, te wāriu o te reo irirangi, I tū atu kare au te ki ko te nā mahi pāpāhoa anake koera I ora mai anō te reo, arā no tērā huarahi, te huarahi o te mātauranga, ngā kura, kohanga reo, kura kaupapa, wānanga, arā, ko tērā huarahi, engari anei I tēnei huarahi o ngā mahi pāpāho. Haere ngā tahi ana I nei ara e rua, nā koera te me ki, mā era mahi, ki au nei koera ngā etahi mea I whakapū mai I tino whakahoki mai te reo.
Kia ora, kia ora.
And I think that's really important because we had access to the research that Richard had been doing in French Canada with the St Lambert experiment with French-English bilingualism. We also had Bernard Spolsky's work and Richard Benton's with the Navajo people. And so they were experimenting in those areas with the language maintenance. So Richard and our team, our students and koro, we worked out we needed to have the media. We needed to have really saturation of the media. We needed to have Te Reo as an official language because if it wasn't an official national language in some way, we needed a language commission or someone to guide that, and we needed to have resources and materials, and we needed to have the education system either Reorua or Te Reo Anake. So those were the four kaupapa, and I think people forget, they think it was just one thing like Māori in schools, but we had a four branch. So we had groups of ourselves like Joe and others who worked on the irirangi, and Robert Pōwhare and others who went into television. We had myself who worked with the schooling and education because I was a teacher, and I worked with Alan Smith and NZEI to promote that within the system. And then we had the national language issue with Richard, and we had our lawyers, Rawirirangi Tauira and Whaimutu Jews who were working in Tari Māori by that time. So people went to work in the areas in which they had a strength, in which they had a graduation interest, and in which they could contribute. So there was like a multiple fingers of the pie. And
a multiplier effect.
Yeah, and a multiplier of fingers. Yeah.
Could I just? I really want to acknowledge your. It sounds like a framework that you'd all developed maybe over time, but with the likes of the Spolsky's report and Richard Benton and others, but just getting a sense of strategy, where you wanted to go, because we've all benefited off that. Schools, broadcasting, public sector. That's
National
become a big thing. A commission. And all of these things. What I love about this, it started though with something as simple as some thinking about how do we get attention. So one question I've got, and people say this to me, Dad, a day, what's that about? And then it became a week, but what was underpinning that thinking from your memory about,
we had
why?
We had already started in school. Ia prare, ka haere mātou ko te kurākoranga o Wellington Teachers College, ki ngā kura katoa, kia haka, kia waiata Māori, ki te whare here, kia whakangahau enei mea kei roti ngā kura. So that's the way we approached the kura to begin with. So that was underway, and then gradually as people came through, they developed the skills and interest. And people were put forward by the organisation. Well, you interested in broadcasting, you better go and get yourself enrolled in that, and so everybody kind of found a space for themselves within their degree, their studies, their interests, and was supported by everybody else.
John, your discussion about education fascinates me, because I know you worked with Sir Tipene O'Regan when he was at Teachers College in those days, or was he?
No, he was at Teachers College, and I'd arrived back from volunteer service abroad because I have relations in Tonga, and into Teachers College with Keri and Tipene and Barry Metcalf, who was a model for me, a Pākehā speaker of Māori, and who could...
The filmmaker?
No, this is Barry Metcalf. He could compose waiata, he sang ori ori.
That's right.
Yeah, and a group of people in social studies at the Teachers College, and I arrived back one day from VSA Tonga, and the next day Tā Tipene had taken me down to meet Koro and Joan Metch and said, hey, we're bringing this person down to enrol. I didn't want to enrol in university, I came to go to teaching, but they put me down there with Koro and the team, and then Tā Tipene looked after me right through my studies, and I was a research assistant for him in the work on Ngāi Tahu and the migrations, and then he kept applying for scholarships for me, and so I just kept staying at university because he kept finding the funding for me. So I'm forever grateful to him and his whānau, and he and Koro and Api and all that crowd, they were all part of that Ngāti Porou powerhouse, that operated of the Debrett's marae, the most famous marae in Wellington here. And that's where the marae was, and that's where the power was. And they were known as the Māori grads, and we built those links with them, Johnny Dial and others. And the links with Māori grads and the students, it drove the powerhouse, because they had, when Labour was elected, they had strong links with the new Labour government in 72. And so we had four or 5 years of Labour after the petition that allowed us to really advance all of those things. So the Labour politicians, Phil Amos acknowledged his daughter, who's currently in the secondary school. Jill Amos was teaching at Hillary College, the radical, the radical secondary school, and that network built out to include the Labour politicians, Matt Rata, and the Minister of Māori Affairs, and so it was kind of, that networking just exploded in those 4 years that Labour was in office, and they were receptive. We had deputations that went to the Minister's office. They came to Victoria to attend student meetings to hear what Te Reo Māori wanted, and it was just like, for us it was like a train that was take off down the track, and we were hanging on by our teeth with the things that we managed to set up in those 4 years. So, yeah.
I want to ask you a question about that time, yeah, taua wā. But before that, I want to ask you a question, Joe. Kei te mōhio au, kāre te nuinga o tātou, tō tātou iwi e taua wā i whakapono. Ka ora te reo, nera? Te nuinga o rātou e kōrero Pākehā ana.
Yeah, ko ngā loko.
He me ua e tērā mōhau. Ina ka hoki te kāinga ka noho koe te taho o whanaunga. Ai rāne, kau rāne?
Kāre, ko taku tipuna kraua, kāre ai e pirangi kia aku au i te reo. I te mea, engari ko taku tipuna kuia i tino tautoko. Taku mahara ko taku kraua i ahu mataku. Kai hoki atu mātou ki roto i ngā ao o mua me rā ahuatanga. I te mea aia i tupu ake i roto te hāhi ringatu, tino taumaha i rā ahuatanga. Nā reira, i ahua, kia nei, engari taku koe tino tautoko i ahu. Nā reira, ka haramai au te whare wānanga, ka hoki atu au kia rāua. I reira, i rungi ngā kōrero a koro Jews, taku hoki tanga atu te kāinga, ka tino āta whakarongo au kia rāua mea rāua ake kupu, me kore e mau tonu ki roti au mō ake tonu atu. Engari, ka tai atu a Richard Benton mā ki roto o māhu, e hia nei ngā wāhi haere e rātou, ngā hapori Māori, tamai rātou ki taku kāinga e orana aku tipuna, ka uiui ingi e taku krau, a rāua tahe ngari ahua tuki rāua, ngā wehengi a rāua koia ki ko, taku kuia ki kone. Waimari au, kai au tonu te hopunga kōrero mai taua wā.
Kai au koe tonu?
Kai au tonu. He mea,
Maitui.
I te mea e puritia paitia e te NZC a ka e rā mea i tino tiakina paitia e rātou. Nā mō e nā mea nā hopu ngā kōrero, kia kōrero atu mō ngā mahi, kunei mahi mo te reo irirangi.
Kapai.
I te mea nui tērā ki au i roto i au, ka hoki au i te kāinga. Kāre i mau aku whakaaro ki te wiki o Te Reo Māori, i te mea kua kaha katoa mo te ao, mo ake tonu, he reo mo ake tonu. Kāre i whakahanga i aku kōrero mo te rā, mo te wiki, mo te marama, mo te tai, ko aku mahara mo ake tonu. Nā reira me tū te reo irirangi, kia putuputa ai. I e rātau, maungia mai e mātou ngā kaumātu o roto o Nēpia here taunga, ki te whare takiu i reira tō mātou reo irirangi he mea akonga, nā ngā akonga i whakatū mo te reo wiki. Mai rā no tā mātou mahi hopu i ngā kōrero. Nā reira, ko neke atu i te toru mano ngā hopu ngā kōrero kai a mātou. He mea whakatahuri, ko whakamati kongia me ke digitise katoa e rā mea i te mea. I te tuatahi rā he mea i runga cassette, nā mea pēnei. Te mate o tērā, ka pīrau noa, nā reira ka mengia, ko whakaputungi e mātou ki roto ngā taonga, Sound Archives, kia kore e riro noa, e pīrau noa. Nā reira, kia nei koera a mātou tino taonga. Ka noho koua ripene kōrero, hei, e rā, me whakapāho e rā kōrero a o mātou kaumātua kuia kia rongo ai ngā taringa ki tērā momo reo o tērā reanga o te taurua mano. I te mea ko rereke te reo mai tērā wā ki tēnei. I roti ngā reo te kaumārima taunei, kia nei ko tino rereke, ko te reo tērā momo reo, kia nei ko e rā taonga a mātou tino taonga e rā hopu ngā kōrero. I te mea kei reira katoa ngā huatanga o te mita, me ngā mātauranga o roto mo te rongoa e rātū mea katoa. Nā reira, koera te mea te tiro whakamua ko te rangahau. I runga ake i nei mea katoa, a mātou mahi, me rangahau e rā mea. Nā reira, i noho ai te rangahau i tahi o aua kōrero rā, te whakatahuri hei pukapuka, te whakatahuri hei taupānga. Nā reira, ko putai au te tahi taupānga, ko pukapuka kōrero, www.pukapukakōrero.nz, ka tae e te tangata te whātoro, o te kore utu, ka pēhea e koe te pātene, ka rongo koe i ngā kuia e kōrero mai ana, ka kite koe i a rāua kōrero, ko tūhi ake, ko kite e koe, ko te reo Pākehā. Kia nei ko ngā pukenga o te reo kei roto i tērā taupānga. Engari, koera te reo e hiha nau te whakaora mai, te whakapakari mai, ko te reo o kui mā e koro mai.
Koera tō moi a nui.
Koera tō moi a nui, ko ko te whakapū mautonu i tērā mō reo, kia mautonu i roto i ngā reanga e haere atu nei. Kia kau e noho ko tō tātou reo, he reo whānui anake. He wāhi anō mō te reo whānui i roto i ngā mahi tōranga pū, ture e rā mea, me noho te tahi reo e ahea e te katoa te whai māramatanga whai māramatanga. Engari, me noho, me mautonu ngā reo ngā mita a iwi. Nā reira, koera te tahi mea kua ua recordings rā, tino taonga i rā.
Tino taonga.
So there we have Joe, and then we have Robert Pulford in the first of television stuff, and people who were working with him. We had Whaimutu Jews and Rawirirangi Tauira in law with Māori Affairs, who were looking at the way in which we would need to change the Act to get a legal language, to get a commission. With myself and a team of students under Tātipeni who were working on education. What would we need to do in education with the ministry, with the curriculums, in order to bring about the things that we wanted? So those teams they were really informal, but we just worked in our own way in which we could make that contribution during those years after the petition. And I have to say that Labour was very supportive. Partly.
Who was in those? Was that Matiu?
Yeah,
Matiu Rata in those days?
Phil Amos, you see.
Right.
And of course Phil's Amos's wife was a teacher at Hillary College with the famous
the radical.
With the famous Hillary people, and so and then Tātipeni had the links to in the Teachers College, to education, and I worked with a group of people in NZEI in the union part. So by everybody making their contribution, we were able to advance on a broad front during those years.
Could I ask you about the broad front, because I liked your kōrero before. One of you talked about how the Students' Association had to be broadened because we didn't want to just have the elite clever ones at university. And I think about Ngā Tamatoa. I think about the bravery that you would need to go and knock on doors when someone's going to set dogs on you. And you think about the warriors we needed and those times. And what I love about that kōrero, it kind of shows the breadth that we need in terms of people to make a movement happen. You might eventually end up with the lawyers and the accountants and whatever with the treaty settlements, but at the beginning, it's just quite rough, isn't it? Can you talk about that in terms of those early days? Because that stuff about down at the railway station and people spitting and just awful. But that's what New Zealand was like in those days.
But I think the thing was that it didn't really worry us because we had the support of Māori grads. We had those growers like Eduardo and Amelia Sterling, you name them. Koro, Whetu, Tirikati. Koro brought people from all around the motu to contribute to his studies department. But in effect, they were resourcing us, the next generation, to understand why it was so important that these things happened. And so there was a constant energy of encouragement and support from Kroa and Kuia that was, charging people.
So we are talking about the kind of secrets of Māori success.
And feeding back to the community. Absolutely.
Being there for us, because
I remember with a really famous elder who was really important in our life was Hemi Potatau, Reverend Hemi Potatau, Presbyterian minister from Nuhaka, who came back to get a qualification in Te Reo when he was in his 50s or 60s. Yeah, and so he was one of our key students, and he was central as a minister, and he led our group. He trained us. He pushed the people up who he felt should be speaking. And he's not featured in the film on the petition, but he's the one leading the petition and running the kōrero, and his whai kōrero there is just missing altogether from that.
You've reminded me the famous phrase from Te Oinuku Rene about knocking on the door of the atua. My dad used to repeat that to us, Ia hatia koe ki taku taonga, or whatever the words were, but it was that wairua, and it was really important to my father because they came from that generation where there was a God, a God, and they believed in that, and but it was important. So Hemi Potatau, a whole lot of people leading that kind of spiritual side was really, really important.
And he was a fluent speaker, and he was a student. You know, and I remember us discussing his research projects that he was undertaking in Nuhaka and things, and so, you know, that guidance from those older people was really central. Plus, remember, we had the Māori grads who kept us in check to make sure we didn't go off the rails, and then we had Tāti Penny and the team at Teachers College to make sure. So it was just.
So Wellington was quite a central hub for this.
It was fate. It was
It was
fate, or
fate.
Ngā Te Atui, tukui o ka mātou, tēnā koha, I don't know what.
Because there were other parts of the country,
Yes.
they had their
Yes.
branches of this, Joe. Would you meet with them? Because there was no Instagram or
No, only
text.
through Huinga
Hey,
Rangatahi. It was
only
Huinga
Ruhinga
Rangatahi
Rangatahi.
that did that.
And how often were those? Like, were they once a year?
Yeah, a couple of years after up until about 75, perhaps. Yeah, but then you had one of the groups that's not really known as Te Rapa Tautoko i Te Reo with George Pare Kōwhai and Toby Dikehana, Toby Mana. Well, I was on the staff at North Shore Teachers College, and so here with them running Te Rapa Tautoko i Te Reo, and Toby had North Shore Teachers College, and North Shore Schools, which was all Pākehā, learning Māori, singing Māori, and doing Māori things. So there was you know, taira whiti again through George Pare Kōwhai, and the work that happened. And Toby's work was central in driving the NZEI and the union movement.
Was Toby in Christchurch?
No.
Or was he up here?
Oh, no,
in those days?
no, he was up. He was at one of the schools in North Shore. Yeah, and
Because I remember some of his books from the early
yeah,
days.
The school became famous.
Yeah.
It was visited by all the schools that wanted to know how to start a Māori program, and Toby was fearsome. You didn't argue with Toby. Toby Mana. And, you know, his contribution has sort of slipped out of it. But we had a Te Reo Māori connection with Te Rapa Tautoko i Te Reo, that they produced masses of resources for schools that people could buy, and they drove in the heart of Pākehātanga, which was Takapuna and North Shore, this value of Te Reo Māori and Māori things for the sort of nation that those kids might want to grow up in. So, you know, that was just a wonderful part of it. And, yeah.
Katoa e nei mea he mea whawhai rawa. E hara e te mea I hō mai no e te kāwanatanga.
Oh.
No.
Me pāpau rawa tātou ki runga I ngā kuaha o te kāwanatanga, me kāra o te pāpau, te umere e rongo ai o rātou taringa ne. Ko te petihana tērā, te petihana e inui atu ana ki te kāwanatanga, tēnā, ko te reo Māori nei, me whakai kia whakākona ki roto I ngā kura, he toko maha ngā tamariki Māori. I tu atu I tērā, hei takoha tanga atu ki ngā tamariki katoa o Aotearoa. Nā reira, ko te petihana, ngā pāpautanga, kuaha, koera tērā whawhai, engari, mai tērā wā, ngā whawhai mō ngā iarere, koera anō te tahi, ka mengia te kreme reo Māori, Waitangi Claim, I te tau tahi mana o Iwarau Warutakau Mārima. Nō muri, ko te ture mo te reo Māori, Warutakau Mawhitu, I reira ka tū te taurewhiri, ka tū te National Kohanga Reo Trust. Engari, nei mea katoa he mea aki rau e tātou. Ko te kaunihira Māori raro I a Latimer, Kereama Aratima, koea te tahi rōpū, rāwatahi ko te rōpū ngā kaiwhakapūmau I te reo Wellington Māori Language Board. Ko rātau I kaue ake te kēhi ki te Privy Council, I runga I te mea, ko te kāwanatanga te hihi e te hoko I ngā frequency. Mena ka rero katoa atu ngā iarere, ko kore tātou whai wāhi, te tuku ati tō tātou reo I runga I ngā iarere, I runga I te pauka whakaata. Nā reira, he whawhai anō tērā. Ko mātou o te reo irirangi o Ngāti Kahungunu, I te tau 93, whakaharingi mātou he radiothon.
Radiothon.
He radiothon, 20 wha haora te roa. Nā mai te praere ki te rāhoroi. Nā koera te tīmatanga no a mātou mahi, engari I roto I rā mahi, ka takohangia mai te hunga whakarongorongo waho, ka eke ngā pūtea ki te 19 mano tāra. 19 mano tāra, nui e ngā pūtea I tērā wā, 1993. Koe rā pūtea, hei takoha atu ki te kaunihira Māori, me ngā kaiwhakapūmau, te kawe ake I te kēhi ki te Privy Council. Koe rā tā mātou takoha ki tērā. Nā reira, I te mea kāretahi e pūtea ne, nā reira, koera tā mātou tā koha ki tērā, e hara i te mea nōku te whakaaro, engari koe te tiamana kai whakahaere, engari rau e te rā kaupapa, nā reira, e nei mea katoa, ko te Māori tonu e whawhai ana o tāna reo, tātou tonu e whawhai ana.
And we've got to remember that ngā kai whakapūmau was Te Reo Māori, and it was Te Reo Irirangi, it was Piripi. And it was those two organisations that got together and went to Tāmati because things had changed, and it was Tāmati who funded the case, actually provided the money to register the claim and to push it forward. And then, by that stage, the pressure moved out of education and was taken up by Māori Affairs and Tāmati as secretary, and the formation of local Māori Language boards was really key to that, and Ngā Kai Whakapūmau was actually the Wellington Māori Language Board. That's how it was focused. And so that kind of broadening into that is what led to the the 85 position.
We've got a few questions that our whānau have put up on board, but before we get to those, I want you to do me a favour. If you can both think of something that you think people don't know that's really important that they should know, and I'll share my story while you're thinking. Okay. So my first job at university, Wikitoria, was working at Te Upukotika as a DJ. And I used to go downstairs, and Piripi and Huirangi would be meeting with Martin Dawson and with Sir Graham Latimer some days, but Whatarangi would be there. And my job was to buy the Sally Lunns and the sausage rolls. And I remember going into the room, and Martin Dawson was going, what's that whakapapa connection between the sky and the earth? And Huirangi was doing a whakapapa. And I was like, what are they going on about? And I dropped the Sally Lunns off, and I dropped the hot sausage rolls off. And it wasn't until later that I discovered they were doing the whakapapa of Rangian Papa, you know, and the connection of the Ierere. And Huirangi was helping Martin understand that. And here's me thinking I was just delivering sausage rolls. It may have been one of those most important hui ever. But I love those stories like that because, you know, none of us know these things. But it's a little bit like Forrest Gump. I was on the side of the photo while they were doing these amazing things. Do you have any recollections, Joe or John, of just kind of amazing events that you were able to witness?
Well, it was like a ride on the spaceship. That's how fast it was. It just took off because you've got to remember we only had 4 years of Labour, and Labour was extremely supportive. But then we had 10 years of a national government following that, and they were not as supportive. And so most of the struggles that we talk about came in the next 10 years. It wasn't until 1984 again that Labour came back in again. So the challenging years were 1985, you know, to 1975 to 1985.
Muldoon.
Yeah, 10 years of Rob Muldoon. And those were the real battles, and that's when the people had to dig in and really keep things going. And I think that what happened was that idea that each Māori organisation that was associated with this battle would keep going and doing its own thing is what maintained it, because Kathy Andawari went to back to Rotorua and established bilingual and then the kura. Tom Roa and I went to Otara and established a kohanga reo and a Reo Rua type program there. Joe was back working, in his area on Reo Irirangi. Robert was working in television. TV. Whai and Rawiri were working on Māori Affairs, the act that gave the Minister of Māori Affairs the right to do so many of these things. And so that those 10 years were the years when the investment that had been put in the first 4 under Labour really started to pay off.
There's a lesson there too, though, eh?
Yeah.
In the hard times, you're hunkering down and you're doing the mahi, because that's what you were all doing. You were going back out to the community and doing the mahi. Joe, were you at the steps when they delivered the petition?
Yes.
What do you remember? Hea o maharatanga mo te rara?
Kia tira tau ki ngā whakāhua ko hoki aku mahara. Engari, he tamariki noho mātai te rā wā. I te whai noa i aku hoa.
E hi koe haere ana.
Ai, kuru mātou ki roto i te rā tuahuatanga. Ko te pai, he ori te katoa mātou ngā akonga i te mea tauhou te nuinga ki te taone, te noho taone, te haere te wharewānanga pērā i a Rangi Nicholson, i a Tom
Rangi.
Mātou katoa e hoa mātou i te rā wā nā rere. I piri mātou i runga i te mea i te ako reo, mātou i te reo Māori. Ko nei, i reira ko mōhio o haere mātou ki a mātou nā reira. Ka piritahi mātou, ka ūkatoa mātou kāro ki runga i tēnei kaupapa o te reo. Engari, i te rawa, kāre rawa i mata ki te rawa, ka pēnei rawa te kaha o te hoki mai o tō tātou reo.
Ka pai.
Kāre rawa, nā ka hoki au tau, te ara anō te tahi waiata, nei ngā kupu. It started with a kiss. I never thought it would come to this. Ko tāku, it started with a petition. And I didn't think it would come to this.
Fruition.
Ai,
yeah.
nā reira. Koira te tahi mea, te rā wā. Tāku no i te whaiwhai noa au i aku
Ka
hoa.
pai.
Engari, kāre rawa i mōhio ka whakaro, ka hipa ngā tau, rima takau, ka pēnei rawa.
Man.
Te ora mai
Te
o te
tiro,
reo.
kei konei tātai,
Ai.
tēnei whare a tāhua, te taurewhiri te reo Māori, a language commission,
Yes.
amazing, doing amazing broadcasting.
Engari, kaua tātai ngoi kore,
Koira,
me kaha tonu tātou.
Māori tū, hea te kororo?
Māori tū, Māori
Māori
ora.
ora.
Māori moe, Māori noho,
Māori
Māori
mate.
mate.
Okay, whānau, we're going to turn to the questions on here. We're going to go through them from 1 to 6, and we probably have to roll through them really quickly.
Okay.
But let's go, if we start off with the one. First, just these two? Ka pai, thank you, studio. So, how did Te Wā o Te Reo Māori change from one day to a year to 1 week in a year? Like, what was the thinking or the action that enabled or caused
Well,
that?
it was, for us, it was demand. We were just flooded after that first year with once we started to advertise. I mean, we had to pay $1 every time for people on Wellington Radio to say kia ora. We had to pay $1. And so we had targeted broadcasting. And as the movement spread in the student movement, there were too many students to fit into the marae. So people got down to work, and in the end, the relationships with Alan Smith and Tamati meant that they were saying, can you support the schools more? So we said, well, okay, you give us a week when we could do something in the schools, and that's how we got to Te Wā o Te Reo Māori, Te Week. And they said, no, we can't do it now because this is a third year.
So it was really a schools thing in the beginning, yeah?
Well, in that year after
Yes.
the petition, Labour was keen
To get it in the schools.
Well, so they were keen to respond to what Te Reo Māori and the organisations were asking for, okay? And they were receptive, and they were friends with the grads, Māori grads, people.
Kia ora.
Yeah, Johnny Dial and others. And so they allowed those things to happen, appointed Māori inspectors, appointed advisors, established a curriculum unit, did all sorts of things in those 4 years.
Amazing.
And it was enough to keep it running, but it collapsed in 1990 when Tomorrow's Schools came and the Department of Māori Education within the education sector went. But before then, there was a huge flourishing. We had a whole group of bilingual schools that were operating all over the rural areas mostly.
So the answer really is, it started really in education from a day, but because of the demand, probably Māori and the government as well said, hey, let's turn it into a week. Education policy, maybe?
Yes, but
was it NZDI as well?
Yeah,
We're pushing
NZDI
this?
was a hard road, and I was the chairperson with Peter Sharples and others of the committee. But it was a really hard road. But it was no harder than Joe and Robert and the others were having in broadcasting when the national government said, we'll cut your funding to NZBC if you put 5 minutes of Māori on. So
we've got 5 more minutes, so we want to whip through these.
Okay.
So I think you said your bit, Joe, about 50 years ago. You did not believe. Kāre paku whakapono. Kai ke tata ki tēnei taumata. Are you happy with our progress? Let's just focus on Te Reo. And what would you fix? Are you happy with the progress?
Ai, tino hari kō katoa anau. Ai.
So,
Engari kaua tātou ngoi kore, kaua wai
Koira,
hongoi kona
koira.
me uitonu.
Me takurongo ki te auwe tātere, ai, mo te hia miliona tāra kua topea. E rā kaupapa whakarau o Reo Māori kua kore. hei tāna ki te kore te kāwanatanga mā te iwi, kia hau whakaro.
Could be.
Joe? Patai nui tērā.
E whakaia nau ki tāna ko ngā mahi aukati a te kāwanatanga i ngā pūte he mea kino tērā. Me te mea he whakaparahako i tō tātou reo, whakaparahako ki te ao whānui, mena ka pērā mai te hunga, mena ka whakapono rātou he reo kino tēnei mo tēnei whina, kāre he reo i tuati te reo tauiwi, he mea kino tērā, nā reira, kia kaha tonu tātou, kaua no tātou e moenua ne, me Māori tūtone tātou.
Kia una whakaro, ara tētahi āputa wāhi ka hei whāinga mā te iwi, ki te whakaki tēnei, ki te whakaoti tēnei kaupapa, heo whakaro.
John?
Well, I think it's part of it. Yeah.
Kia ora.
I think the thing was, the whole thing has succeeded because so many people with so many different skills across so many sectors just kept fighting and kept pushing, and so it got a life of its own. Yeah.
Ka pai.
Yeah.
Biggest challenge you see for the reo? Complacency?
Ko te ao nui tonu i te mea, kei te kuku mai ngā reo o te ao katoa.
O te ao.
Yeah.
Ko rero ngā mahara o a tātou tamariki ki te ipurangi. Ko te ipurangi, he kuaha ki te ao. He pai tonu tēnā, engari ko te mate, ko e rā reo, e rā āhuatanga, kei te tāme i ngā āhuatanga o te reo ake ne. Nā reira, ko pēnei nā tamariki o nai nei, ko kore pētahi e whakaro me ako rātai te reo, ko huri ke o rātou mahara ki te ao nui. Nā reira, koera no tētahi mea tira pēr. Nā reira, kia kaha tonu te tuku i ngā tamariki ki ngā kohanga reo,
ki ngā kura
kaupapa Māori, ki ngā me haere tonu ngā wānanga, me kaha tonu te kāwanatanga, te tuku pūtea, kia tūtonu ngā ara mātou, me ngā ara pāpāho.
Ki o whakaro, mā te kāwana tonu e utu i ngā nama, mo te reo, e orai te reo.
I te mea i raro i te triti, ko te reo he taonga i raro i te triti. Kāre tu atu, kāre tu am.
Ka pai. John, what are your thoughts about the big challenges?
Well, the same. It's never been something that any one group or organisation could do by themselves, and the key to it is that whakawhanaunga, that whanaungatanga that's been built between the commission, between the organisations, between the broadcasting, between the education sector, and that's what's at threat when you start to, when it starts to feel like it's going to break up. But I think that we're seeing those parts of the real program be strong, stick together, be determined, and just to ride it out. And
John, I want to ask you about the private sector. So this week I see Downers.
Yeah.
Other private sector organisations, Rawuni has been talking to them. Nahi was talking to them, Auckland Transport.
Yes.
And what I love is, I don't think I ever imagined that the private sector, the captains of industry would be supporting Te Reo Māori. Nor did we. So yeah, I mean, how amazed are you at that?
We're stunned. We're stunned. Yeah. We are stunned, and that's why nothing that any government does can stop
Is
that.
ever enough?
No.
Yeah.
No. It can't be stopped. It's like a virus, a good virus.
Good.
He rawe te whakarongo ki, te haramai runga te wakarere rangi te atme, e reo Māori katoa ngā waia. Ko pēnā rawa,
Me te mā te wā, ka puta koe i te wakarere rangi, ka mā te wā, te steward, ka mutuihi.
So these tentacles are the octopus that started back all those years ago. They seem to have a life of their own, and we're not controlling them. We're just watching in amazement and enjoying the ride. Yeah.
Mā taki au te whakata i te pōra, he kōtiro Māori e mahi ana i Bunnings. Kei te kōrero Māori kēlai e mō ngā tipu.
The Bunnings are. Ka mutuihi.
Bunnings.
Nā
reira, rawe katoa i rā, ko huri mai te ao Pākihi, ne? Ko ki te rāta he pūtea tonu kei roto i te reo Māori, ne? He wāriu tonu kia rāta.
Wāriu, me te ngākau nui ki te reo, ki tau i te rā huatanga. Te warewhare, katoa te hoko i ngā tihāte, me ngā poraka, mo te whakaraori te reo.
I guess the one thing that I'd like to see more attention to is Kura Kaupapa Māori has shown how successful it is.
Kia ora.
Te reo, academically, look, the state system should be doing the same thing. They just have not invested enough in driving those state units. They've left them under the control of the Pākehā school, or sometimes of the Pākehā principal and board, who really don't know about these things to run and to manage it. And so I think we need a much stronger focus on strengthening the state bilingual units to really make them producing good, fluent speakers, readers, writers, biliterate people for the future. We can't just leave it to kohanga reo and say, oh, well, kohanga, thank you very much. No, the state system has to front up and review what it's doing with the way Te Reo is operating in the schools.
Tēnā korua, e whāminiti kei te toe.
Me te pōka whakaata Māori. Koroa e tahi o rātau pūtea, ko kore tātou e tino rongorongo i ngā hōtaka hou, e puta mai ana. Nā reira me tika te tuku i ngā pūtea tika, e pai ai te puta o tō tātou reo. Kāre tika
Kei te mima koe, he maroki ngā hōtaka.
Karaka e mea nau, kāti te poroporo i ngā pūtea
Ka pai.
a te kāwanatanga ki te pōka whakaata Māori.
Ka pai.
He mea nui tērā ki a tātou ko te pōka whakaata.
I think we'll be all right, Joe, because we've produced so many young people. All
Come on.
my relations, all my mokopuna, they don't know who Te Reo Māori or Tamatoa is, but they're driving Te Reo. And so I think whatever government comes or whatever government goes, those young people are going to take this kaupapa forward. And they're the ones that will,
And I've got to admit, I'll put out a shout out, even though we didn't win on Saturday night. Well, the boys didn't. The girls won.
Yes, the girls
Ngā
won.
mamaku, katoa, engari ngā boys. But the ability to watch Sky TV, kai te mihi mai rātou, ka tae te whakarongo ki Te Reo Māori, Te Reo Pāpāho ana, ka mau te wihi, kai te mihi au ki ngā kamupene. Yeah, koira. So all of these things are, like you said before, John, you can't stop this progress. Hey, it's just happening.
unstoppable.
It's unstoppable.
I went to my son's wedding a year or so ago, and there's his kids there with their poi and all their friends in the Pākehā sort of semi-wedding, doing their poi and their songs and things. No one's told them to get up and perform. They just got their pois out of their bags, twirl them up, go up the front and start doing it. And it's just become part of who we are as New Zealanders. And I'm so proud of that.
I Te Wiki nei ka tū te whakatātai ki te kurai o Onekawa, kei reira ko nei kurai nana. Ko te whakatātai ko rātou pepeha. Ka toa ngā tamarika tū rātou te whakahua pepeha. Tamariki Māori mai, Pākehā mai, koe rā rātou mai. Nā reira ko puta tērā ahuatanga ki roto i ngā kurai.
So a little bit of a shove, a bit of plug, sorry, not a shove, a plug. I also work at Bernardo's Aotearoa, and I went to a centre, mainstream centre, and they have mihi rākau. And they pass the rākau around, and the child will go, ko mea taku ingoa. Oh, ka mau te wehi. So even in our mainstream institutions, we are seeing Te Reo Māori is unstoppable. E te whānau, we hope you've had an awesome session. My cup is full. The names that have been mentioned, the people that I know in my lifetime, but also the legends that I've heard about, that you've mentioned in our kōrero. Can I mihi to you both, Joe Te Rito and John, no mātou te whiwhi, no mātou te maringa nui, tēnei mātou. Me ki Aotearoa nui tonu, te ao! E tautoko ana i Te Reo Māori, tūturu o white whakamaua kia tīna, hui e, tai ki e. Tēnā koutou, hei kona mai whānau.
Mauri ora.